Just go from the left.
Hello. I'm Eric Manise. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at San Francisco Compute out in beautiful, sunny California. We run a marketplace and accompanying software for making compute easy and accessible, no matter where you are or who you are.
Elizabeth Wheel, founder and managing partner at Scribble Ventures. We're an early stage AI-focused pre-seed and seed fund. Currently investing out of our third fund, an $80 million vehicle. We love to be first check-in where we can and love backing top 1% founders. Based in the Bay Area, I started my career out there, been at a few venture firms and Andreessen Horowitz before deciding to start my own. And was early days of Twitter, back when it was Twitter.
And I'm Walter Goodwin. I'm the founder and CEO at Fractile. We're a AI accelerator company. So we're a team of chip designers, AI researchers, hardware builders, building a novel silicon, a novel platform to run frontier models 50 times faster, 10 times cheaper than you'll be able to on sort of flagship GPUs in a couple of years' time. I actually came into this world having been an AI researcher and just seeing this incredible kind of verticalization in what was needed from compute, really, as we concentrate our workloads into these incredibly significant, fast-scaling frontier models. Compute is, in many ways, the single kind of ground truth on how far and fast we can go there. And so it's been a kind of great privilege to work on this gnarly problem for the last 3 years.
And I'm John Willett, co-founder and COO of a company called Rogo. We're an AI platform fine-tuned for large financial services firms. So think big investment banks like Lazard and Moelis and big private equity firms. We're based in New York City. I used to be a banker myself for a couple of years at Barclays and JP Morgan, very lowly analyst, bottom of the totem pole. So automating a lot of my former work that kept me up till 5 a.m. every day.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction. Sorry I was late. I was in the wrong room. But it was not my fault. So thank you very much for being here with us today to talk about this great topic, the AI trillion-dollar opportunity, build fast or fade. My first question is simple. How do you grow fast like that? I'm just addressing the startups first. How do you grow fast without exploding, really? Do you have any advice for the startups that are in the room?
Sure. I mean, on our side, we're selling to the enterprise. And so for us, we have these kind of slow, painful sales cycles that are already kind of built into what we're doing. And everything for us is about establishing trust with the top level decision makers, both on the security side, the deployment side, and the product side. And so we really started from kind of bottoms up traction, working with junior analysts, figuring out, what's a product that they would talk to each other about and that would go kind of internally viral at a firm before we started, trying to put high price tags on it and make a lot of money. So I think, starting with the user pain points and going from there has been valuable for us.
One of the things that's kind of funny about the chip industry is even when, behind the curtain you feel like you're moving incredibly fast, you don't ship often and fail fast. You ship every 2 years, every 3 years. And so actually this for us is a really kind of finely calibrated challenge because we'd much rather, pull back by a couple of weeks on when we get that first product out and have it actually fit the market than, kind of ship fast and then own this piece of silicon that's cost us, maybe $50 million to produce that nobody wants. And so this is that is a kind of, I guess it's a taste question really, and ensuring, we talk about PMF across all startups. PMF in chip startups is, you either go to 0 or to 1, and we have to be very, very confident in that. So I think, that means that there's very fast movement, but really kind of thoughtful gating on what actually makes it through.
And
Makes sense. So we're a software company, so our answer is going to be very different, which is we've built our marketplace probably 3 or 4 times and rebuilt it. But it was the right decision because building it the first time, even if we knew it wasn't going to be the final thing, got us to customers immediately. So if you don't have the, I very much understand the limitations you guys had and the things you had to work within. We didn't have a lot of those barriers. Where we did have some, probably most similar to John, is we're building a marketplace, and so there are some financial concerns that we had to be careful of, KYC, a lot of these aspects. But at the end of the day, it's the tried and true element of software. It's the ship fast or die trying. And so we lived that. I will say, like in general, there's kind of the best founders I know and I've met who are able to kind of dance between going 1,000,000 miles an hour and not exploding the rocket ship while they're flying it, can kind of have a feel for like where that edge is, right? Like when you're driving a car, it's like right before you have to shift into the next gear, you can kind of get a sense for it. And I think you can only get that through trial by fire. So my number one advice to people is just don't be afraid to start shipping stuff.
Elizabeth, if you want to add something, maybe advice from the VC perspective.
Yeah, it's actually very hard to evaluate companies right now on that scale and I very much, we urge our founders to launch fast, try, see how the market receives it, go with the tailwinds that you're finding. And one of the legs on the Scribble investing stool, my husband, he day-to-day runs product at OpenAI, but he's an investor on our team as well. But he always talks to our founders about, the models are moving so quickly right now. You actually need to reinvent your product every single day because today is we are using the dumbest model we will ever use for the rest of our lives. And needing to be a product founder and follow that trend, that's hard to build behind. So I very much encourage our founders to think that way too, where you are essentially flying blind, and how do you put the guardrails around your company to really think that way and build.
And Walter, maybe how do you predict things, because things evolve very fast. So and maybe you can answer too, but how do you predict what's going to happen in the months to come?
Yeah, and maybe I might lay out some timelines as well. So these are very kind of approximate numbers, but I think if you have, in the chip design space, if you have a really great team that has done everything before, has shipped silicon before at volume, and we're lucky to have that at Fractile, even then you have this moment from kind of definition of a product architecture through to tape out, which is the moment you send that to the foundry to be made. That's going to be a minimum of 12 months at speed of light. And then it might take 6 months to get that chip through the foundry processes. So you're looking at close to 2 years between that point of definition and when your first silicon ships, and you're selling that to people who want to then put that in their data center for a lifetime of 3 to 5 to 6 years. And I say all of this, and I still think that new chips for AI is the thing to be working on. But it does mean that kind of calibration you have to have as close as possible to a kind of crystal ball on where things go. I think part of it is building a very product-centric organization. We're not building kind of slightly faster CPUs. We're building something for an external world. We're building it for this world that moves really fast, and so we make sure that we're just incredibly plugged into to those customers today. And
I also think that there are new metrics, and when you're identifying what are those early signals of either growth, it's not necessarily revenue right now, but choose a metric and start seeing if that is the one that you'll scale, and that will be your company's North Star. And I think you have to be mindful in the early days of which is the metric you're going to pick, because there are weird signals right now, and we look for those with the founders we invest in.
Yeah, our metric, because I think it's funny, it was customers in San Francisco actually coming and knocking on our door and asking if they could get some like debugging help. And I was like, that's the right metric for us right now.
Do you have another metric to share?
Metric-wise, nothing super specific related to this, but what I would say is on kind of skating where the puck is going, and like Elizabeth said, like knowing that we are going to be working with the dumbest models that we'll ever be working with. The name of the game for us is our data sources and the tools that we want our agents to have access to are so heterogeneous across public markets, private markets, internal data, slide outputs, other sorts of tools that are in our app. And there's definitely a temptation to, limit the universe of what we're giving our models access to, because when you give it all global filings and all presentations and all structured data, unstructured data, et cetera, you sometimes get worse results. And we've always fought that temptation, and we've known that by building the most kind of comprehensive, universal data platform possible, by tagging it in a consistent way, even if we're not seeing the performance that we want on new data sets out the gate, we know that give it 6 months, add some more inference time compute, add more golden examples, et cetera, having patience and knowing that the results will catch up.
And how do you structure your governance, since you go very fast? Because we know in France we have Mistral. It's like the hot startup here, and it's when it was like 6 months old, he had to hire a legal counsel. It was a public affairs. That's not very common. So how did you do that?
I mean, on our side, the governance really, comes in two different pieces that our firms are most interested in. One is security on the kind of ProdSec, AppSec infra level. This is where most of our conversations happen, and there's a really important balance that we need to strike when we're deploying with a JP Morgan or a large bank around, like, we want to have as much of the app live in their perimeter as possible for their own InfoSec constraints. But then also we want to host as much of the model inference and other pieces of the app as possible so that we can do R&D like a SaaS company. And so being able to find kind of that hybrid deployment architecture and work that with our InfoSec teams to satisfy all their governance is frankly the most important thing that we're working on. The other main piece so that's kind of what the InfoSec and IT folks are interested in. And then the more kind of business, operational, banking stakeholders are more interested in, like, how are the bankers going to use this tool and how can we be sure it's going to be used in a responsible way? How do you use a tool that is literally trained to always look correct, but still hallucinates, 1 in 20 times? In an industry where if you put the wrong thing in front of a client, you lose trust forever, right? So that temptation for bankers to just take whatever slide comes out of Rogo and just put it into a deck because it saves them, 6 hours is really, really high. And so we work with them a lot to, both on the product level, create an app that makes it really, really easy to check every single answer, audit every citation, et cetera. And then also we spend a lot of time on the training level, literally in the building, training users on how to check the answers. We tell everyone, like, hey, this thing is pretty good, but, like, it's an intern, it's an AI intern. You got to check every single piece of work that comes back, and really training them on how to do that. That ends up being the most important thing for these compliance teams, is just making sure the bankers are using it responsibly and they're still learning how to do everything themselves, et cetera.
So I think, a chip company doesn't have, user data in quite that same way. I think for us, scaling responsibly is as much about, I talked about that 2-year horizon to having that product. At that point, the temptation also becomes, nobody can prove the counterfactual. I could appear here and say it's going to be 1,000 times faster than NVIDIA's Rubin. And so actually, I think for us, that sort of discipline and responsibility is about, again, it comes to that sort of early touch point with customers. The numbers that we're referencing don't stand up to deep scrutiny as we then do that deep dive, then we do unravel. And so we're very, very disciplined in making sure that when we put a number out there, it's one which we can take people through and kind of, articulate. And that, I think, that's our big challenge over the next kind of, 18 months, is ensuring that in that path to product, we can build this movement. We're building credibility around a product that will arrive. When it comes, it's a sea change in what you can do. But until then, we live off our kind of reputation and what we can articulate about this product in the market.
That makes sense. I mean, we're probably more similar to John here in terms of our approach to governance. I'd break it into internal and external for us. Internally, we're a marketplace. The number one thing is make sure that you know where all the money is at all the time, because that's been a problem for other people in the past. But if you've got that locked down, we don't have a lot of the legal and other governance aspects that we need to be as cautious of. But I think being in San Francisco, being in the U.S., being in that hub of AI, where things are moving a million miles an hour, we end up being in a situation where we're able to weigh in on upcoming regulatory aspects. We're able to work with the state of California. We're able to work sometimes at the national level, and say from a startup's perspective that's actually living it, that's actually serving customers, what things would kill the industry, what things are things we can work within. I think there's, and that's an interesting position to be in, where you're not just thinking, inwardsly, but you're thinking outwardsly.
Elizabeth, you want to add something maybe?
I think we're good on
You're good. Thank you. We've seen more and more startups, AI startup with, let's say, tiny teams, small teams, and generating a lot of revenues and really fast. So what's your take on that? Do you think you can just grow indefinitely but just stay a small team?
Yeah. Right now, we look at about the new, 3 to 5 employees is the 12 to 15, just, few months, years back, but in QuickSight. And that's able to, I think it's interesting also as we look at the fundraise rounds, because these pre-seeds are typically even a bit larger, and asking the question, does that need to be? Should we do a smaller pre-seed, invest in that level in 2 to 3 small person teams, save more of the upside in the cap table for the team when you hit scale and grow, and then should that seed be the larger round? So we've been seeing new round dynamics as well, and that's something I think we have to take into this new approach of venture, and why the fund model for Scribble is relatively constrained. So with an $80 million fund and taking those bites, that capital can be spread across still some good, great companies and a diverse portfolio.
I'm going to say something that's maybe biased and perhaps slightly controversial relative to that. In my view, I think some of the most impactful companies that are still going to be built and still need to be built are not able yet to reduce their headcount tenfold versus, the pre-AI era. And I think, hardware is an interesting example of this, right? We need expertise and have expertise from, transistor level layout up to kind of LLM inference server design and everything in between. And I think that expertise and that sort of breadth is something that is very hard to replicate. And so I think there are a number of companies that I think will be built very quickly and efficiently to a certain scale on the basis of that model. I think a lot of times that enduring value and that next kind of leap in terms of real kind of value creation that is not just transient may actually lead to organizational structures that we would already consider familiar.
I think I'm somewhere between the two here. For us, it's funny because Rogo's the first startup I've ever worked for, so I don't really have the kind of precedents in my mind to compare it to, and I'll think hey, we're moving really fast, but maybe that's normal, and then I'll talk to a customer and they're like, oh, what are you guys, 500 people? I'm like, no, we're 35 people, and so I feel it then. But what's funny is our engineering team, for a small team, actually has a lot of different sub teams, and we have obviously full stack product engineering, we have our AI research team, then we have our infra and deployment engineering team, and those different pockets we find are using AI in such different ways, and probably in an expected sense, where that kind of full stack product engineering team, that is ripe greenfield for the use of AI, right? That is problems that have been solved before at scale, and we just need to do them in a clean way as fast as possible. And so those teams are using AI to an incredible extent. But then the other side, our AI research team, they're doing stuff that's never been done before, right? And so obviously, tools like Rogo and ChatGPT are great thought partners for synthesizing research that's coming out, helping debug code, et cetera. But it's it's a little bit less relevant there, and it's more like the hardware thing where you're kind of pushing out something that hasn't really been done before.
Yeah, no, I agree with that too, and this is the last thing I'll say on is, as much as I would love to have 10 LLMs in a trench coat design the next chipset, it's not quite there yet. I agree. With your point on the sub-teams, I feel the exact same way. We have a bunch of, we have to have a bunch of engineers, but we have a surprising amount of subgroups because we're doing, on the orchestration level, doing VMs, we're doing Kubernetes, sometimes we're doing Slurm for research groups. We have a bunch of different ways that our marketplace can actually serve the compute to customers, but each of those is so different and different, deep skill sets required for it. We were the first to have VMs working, as far as I'm aware, in a multi-tenant environment on the H100 chip in a robust, serviceable way. And we would just not have been able to do that without like the core competency and the depth of talent. So I completely agree.
And what's funny, and I don't mean to take up airtime, but in a lot of ways, I think where I'm seeing some of the most efficiency gains from AI, people talk a lot about like the software side, and those exist, but like our non-technical teams have been sped up infinitely by AI. And for a growing startup, it's like, hey, do we need an in-house lawyer, or can we just have like a couple of smart people who are using ChatGPT for the first few years? Or like, do we need a internal data analytics engineer or a business intelligence engineer for internal systems? Like, probably not, right? Like, you could be pretty dangerous with an AI system and some text-to-SQL prompts. So we found that the kind of the non-technical team is able to elevate to competence in the different functions and stand them up without needing a specialist for longer, and that's been one of the biggest differences for us.
Yeah, we're seeing that in user research a lot, customer support, obviously, and even the HR stack. But how many tools do you lean on to keep lean on those ones if there's a good head of state in each of those departments?
One point on this actually is in terms of AI's ability to enable quite large and complex organizations to stay very synchronized. That's somewhere where I think especially as you scale fast, it's a huge challenge in companies. You've got docs in various different places. Nobody's quite sure who's in charge of, which area. The ability to have something that sits on top of all of that and you speak to the organization essentially directly actually enables us to, in some ways, we talk a lot about that kind of complexity of, quadratic complexity as team sizes grow. Managing that and orchestrating that is something which actually has got easier rather than harder.
Now I want to talk about regulations a little bit because we are in France, in Europe, and we love regulations. So do you think hypergrowth can be really an obstacle when you are an AI startup? Regarding regulations. And I mean, in Europe, of course, but you also have regulations in the US, especially in California.
I mean, on our side, we have to work with every firm, and they tend to have very different regulations, across all the different companies. A lot of it, again, not to keep nerding out about infrastructure, but it's literally about like where does the data live? We need to make sure to use like the EU data centers for this company's data versus this, and so we spend a lot of time there. I mean, lucky for us, although we're in the financial space, we're not doing anything with personal finance. We're not doing anything with, PIAA or any sort of identifiable information. So, we tend to be more focused on the like MNPI side, where like bankers are using, documents that are from non-public transactions, and so it's less kind of from the federal level, but it's more from their relationship with their own customers and their NDAs that they have in place is more what we're focused on.
I would say, one thing that is a huge theme in our world is export control. The world is still going through a kind of unraveling of various supply chains and a separation out of supply chains around critical technologies like AI compute. And that's obviously both sort of something that we have to, very much stay abreast of, but it is also, I think, a huge opportunity. We're seeing a degree of separation between various different economies, and we are seeing, I think, the desperate necessity to build all of these various layers of these absolutely critical stacks from, energy through to data center capacity through to silicon and all the way up into the application layer and frontier model layer, in Europe, let's say, as well as in China and in the US. And so, I think that's something which is in some ways it accrues, I think, again to the challenger rather than the incumbent, because today that is a daily headache if you're NVIDIA or AMD and you get a new missive from the from the US government. This is something which we get to kind of observe and leverage, I guess.
Yeah, like I said earlier, we're in this interesting position where we get to help shape some of those regulatory aspects. I think it's an honor. I think it's wonderful that we get to. because if those, like, where it always fails, in my opinion, is when regulations are enacted without actually talking to and working with the people that it affects, the industry that it affects. So, my personal view, being in that position, is that, we are able to move faster because we can get ahead of a lot of these things. Not get ahead in terms of like skirting around, but in terms of helping shape it in the right direction. We've seen this happen already in California with some bills that were passed, or at least were drafted and are going to be passed in the near future, last year and early this year. And we're seeing it to some extent as well on the national level. We've been able to work with some of the tech transfer team as well as some of the other folks there on some of their, to their export control thinking, and really educate them on, if they go direction A, direction B, what it would mean for the U.S. economy and the rest. So, we're pro-regulatory in that aspect. We think that if you get it right, it helps everyone move faster because you aren't wondering things. There are no unknown unknowns in that capacity.
And yes, we've been seeing DC lean in as well. Government agencies that are leaning into using AI tools, meeting both the larger incumbents and some smaller startup opportunities. But I think it's a great signal that we're pointed in the right direction. And I feel like it's a fairly different approach than if you look at the crypto wave just a few years back. I felt that wasn't as much of a let's lean in and build. It was more let's put the controls around because we're scared. So I guess it's a one good signal coming from DC right now, in my perspective.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll add, like, I think it's the very different, the markets, like crypto to AI, like a lot of the crypto mindset was like, let's just run and skirt around as long as possible. And I think a lot of the AI people, plenty of whom come from crypto, are like, okay, well, we saw how that played out. Let's actually try to work together on building this.
Well, I think only one of these provides long-term value to humanity.
You know what? I'd agree.
So we see a lot of new startups emerging. Like, I don't know if you saw him on stage. It's the new European startup. It's called Lovable, and it didn't exist like 2 years ago, and it's like doing 85 million ARR. It's crazy, but other startups are dying. We had GitHub, then now we have Cursor, we have Lovable. So how do you make sure you won't be dead next year?
Great
Ominous,
question.
but and we very much admire the Lovable team and all that they've built, and then all these new tools too. But for us, that really comes down to the founder. And I think right now, from the investing side, that top 1% talent, those are the ones that are going to take this opportunity and stay ahead and win. And that's something that I think is even more important now than it has been.
I think it goes back to what we were talking about before of like skating where the puck is moving on AI. I don't think you can lose by assuming better and better reasoning capabilities from the model, longer and longer context windows for the model. And so our approach is, we do a lot of kind of domain-specific fine-tuning. We're doing a lot of, internal research, but we set everything up to benefit in a step function way from advances at the frontier layer. And so if you're building at the application layer, I think, your number one focus has to be making sure that your product roadmap is bullish AI in the long run. And then you're setting up relationships with your customers to kind of be that, McKinsey meets Palantir of like, hey, like, no matter what OpenAI releases this year, Anthropic releases this year, like, we're going to work with you guys to make sure that you're remaining on the cutting edge, and we're going to pivot our product roadmap as necessary to do that.
And we think moat is even more important now than it was. And it's always been a question, but is it a data moat necessarily, or what is the key moat? Because you can be killed overnight, and it's something that we debate a lot internally.
Yeah, I mean, I'll add to this from our lens as a compute marketplace. We saw last year H100 prices went all over the place, right? There was an oversupply, there was a glut. The prices were lower than anybody ever could have predicted. Certainly, all of the capex models were wrong. But what we built for, and the reason that we were not affected by that necessarily, is because we anticipated the potential for something like that happening. And so always, I tell this to any startup that I talk to, is like, if they're asking for advice, is like, over model your downside risks. Like, it's not the most people are like, oh, I'm gonna make $1 million, $100 million contract happen, and that's how I'm gonna like make it. It's like, no, it's not dying 10 times. That is the more important thing than the one big success. Like that is like staying in the game is the longest piece.
I think the harder, more painful something is in the present, in some ways, the less likely you are to die, tomorrow. And I think that's something which we really feel is, unless we are doing something which feels almost impossible in terms of the day-to-day challenges, the degree to which we have to build a genuinely sustainable moat and break through barriers on a kind of daily basis, then maybe we are set up to kind of die next year. And I think that is a real difference between these companies for whom velocity is the only game, and the ones who are really trying to say, where is the place that we can build long-term value lock-in? Where are the really hard things where we can, where ultimately we're going to be filing loads of patents and building things that nobody else in the world has. And I think that takes people today to things like deep tech, because it is easier to see that path. It's a very hard path, but it exists in quite uniquely, I think, in these kinds of sectors.
Yeah, and I'll go one step further and say, because I like what you said, it's not just what I was saying about modeling where you could die. It's living on the edge you're talking about, but because you're living on the edge, you might trip, like you might fall on your face, and you have to be able to like pick back up from that and keep going, even when it is the most difficult thing and it is completely unknown. So yeah, absolutely.
One last question, a bit of perspective, of course. So how do you see maybe AI in the next decade, if I can say that? And maybe, Elizabeth, what are you excited about today?
Yeah, there's a few big areas that I don't think we've purely put in the education space a personal private tutor in everybody's pocket on the planet yet. And that I think we will be shocked we didn't have looking a decade back. Also, I think about our future selves. I have 3 small children and an 83-year-old mother who I know will not be here forever. But I think I have a feeling that in a decade, my children will be able to ask, a past me about my memories, my experiences, and always have that person. So I think there's a weird area of future self I think about. In a decade, I think we'll be shocked that each and every one of us isn't taking a personalized prescription if you are on any medications. So I think there's a lot in healthcare as well. And I think we're just scratching the surface on robotics. I think we've seen a few things here. We have a few investments in some interesting plays there too. So I think we're getting started on that side. And I'd look at space as a new frontier. And in a decade, I do believe that we'll be looking back and shocked at how little is being done in space and space exploration and even AI in space going forward. So those are some of the broad areas I look about.
I think, this is why, Elizabeth, you're a VC and we're founders. We're going to have, suddenly my view is sort of narrow and in the engine room.
I was just going to say, yeah, that was grandiose.
That's where we need to be. I think the things that I think about in terms of, what pertains to what we're doing, I think there are going to be some real shifts in how we think about this kind of engine room of AI. Today, almost everybody who's speaking here is thinking about tokens, for instance, as the kind of unit of consumption. We sell our chips on the basis of so many more tokens per second at so much lower cost per token. I think we are going to shift to a place where in the end it's that sort of quality of service that gets monetized. Tokens was a sort of transitory unit of measurement on the path to that. And I think in a weird way that, I'd like to bridge that to your much bolder vision, which is that once we've got there, we can stop worrying about, how long are we leaving our light bulbs on, for instance, and start just kind of illuminating the world with this capability.
I get asked a lot by kind of anxious bankers and folks from those firms, what is the world going to be like in 10 years? Are we going to see investment banking advisory revenues go down? And the logic makes some sense there, right? It's like, hey, if everyone's using the same kind of AI tooling, is this work commoditized? Do spreads go down? Do you need to pay Goldman 7% of the enterprise value for a transaction? I'm very optimistic. I think that senior bankers their actual skills, which are knowing the markets inside and out, knowing different people at the sponsors, at the strategics, having been in this seat many times before, just becomes more and more relevant as these AI systems get rolled out. And you know, the analogy I think of is, you know, kind of like an architect. It's like if every Paris, you know, Parisian architect could get any building they want built immediately, I think we would see a more diverse skyline of buildings, right? Because
Such
you can
a controversial statement. In Paris.
but you would get to see, you know, every person's vision for what they want built created, and I think that's what we're going to see at any of these kind of very human-centric industries like investment banking. That if you're a managing director, you can spend the actual time doing what you're good at. And not, you know, just spreading comps and doing news runs and doing these very pre-templated workflows. And so I actually think there will be more differentiation for those professionals who have been, you know, made their careers as becoming experts in the space.
And I think why it's so important to read more history right now, too, especially when you're thinking that next decade out. I mean, I look at this likened to, you know, Edison and getting light. Like, light just didn't empower us to have more infrastructure, manufacturing, and the electronic piece that goes on with that. But you think about how it shifted the global workforce. And now there were more hours in a day to work. And how did that change labor dynamics, labor markets? And why I urge everybody in here to pick up some weird random history book right now, because rereading these, I think those are the things that start to pop new ideas into my head.
Yeah,
and for us, sorry, you please go.
I was just going to add on to that. You know, I think the history and Edison specifically, like, we think of compute as the new oil, the new major resource in the world. You look at like oil bringing us from the Industrial Revolution to the information age. I believe firmly that compute is going to take us that next leap in humanity. And so when we talk about problems that we're solving, you know, and that we're excited about seeing solved in the next, you know, decade plus, for me, it's the access, it's solving access to this resource, right? We have similar problems today that we had 100 years ago, where you have these isolated, stranded, disparate sources of this resource. And, you know, if you look at the 20th century, power grids, power markets solve that problem. That's why I'm so passionate about what we're doing, where we're building, you know, the compute grid, the compute market, to make this, you know, more of a utility, more of an on-demand resource instead of a scarce resource. And I think that's just going to empower the next, you know, renaissance of AI and all the other things that we're talking about.
And I was just gonna like totally agree that, you know, on the historic point, like in finance, it's like Excel, right? And I've talked to bankers who were around in investment banking before Excel or before it was, you know, totally mainstream, and they were a little bit anxious because they were like, my whole job is like doing the math like by hand around like, you know, mergers and acquisitions, which is hilarious to think back on that was like the edge that a banker had, was how well they could calculate a WACC by hand. And I think we're just in the next kind of iteration of that.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time at Rise Summit. That was a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.